Good evening and welcome back to Vegas October 1 Sounds. Boy, it's been a tough week. My mother's back from the hospital. We're recovering, and I'd just like to take a little bit of time now to introduce you to what I feel is probably one of the more fundamental observations that can be made with regards to gunshot acoustics and the way that most channels are presenting the work. So if you follow along with me for the next half hour or so, you too can come to a epiphany with regards to what people are telling you. So let's just start out. For those who might be dropping into this channel for the first time or whatnot, I suggest you go to my very first video, which is Introduction to Gunshot Acoustics, and take the hour to listen and watch that video, because I'm not going to spend a lot of time revisiting what a sonic visualizer is and what a sonic visualizer session is. So anyway, right into it. Here we have 3 different videos, all recording the sounds produced by Volley 9. And Volley 9 is pretty unique in that it's one of the few to have 3 separate bursts, and the only one to have them in this arrangement, i.e. Short up front, seven rounds fired with a gap followed by 70 some, I think. Let's see, 7 and then a gap, and then 22. So 22 plus 7 would be 29. 1 would be 30. So that'd be 71 rounds fired in the middle if it was a 100-round burst, a 100-round volley. So overall, before we get into what I want to present, let's observe a few things about these recordings. On the top, we notice that these sounds, whatever they are fairly crisp and clean. In fact, if we expand this out, by zooming in, we'll see that these sounds produced by the supersonic projectile, which are up in the little bit higher frequency than the muzzle blast, which are the lower frequency, and they're alternating, one crack, one boom, one crack, one boom. And here's either something hits something, or there's a strong echo or a strong reflection. So in the first one, we see that these are all pretty crisp and clean. Now in the third one down here, that's not the case. If we zoom back out, we can see all the top end frequencies, namely the cracks produced by the supersonic projectile, are smeared. And that's a result of reflection and reverberation. Namely that wherever this tape was located, there were a lot of reflections. Not so much in the lower frequency, but some. As we can see, they're not crisp and clear. There always seems to be a little extra associated with each muzzle blast. In the middle one, we have sounds on the muzzle blast which are cleaner than the ones on this lower panel. But up at top on the supersonic cracks, they're kind of intermittent. In fact, if we zoom out to a large scale where we can see everything, you'll see that most of the time the supersonic cracks are hidden way down there in the noise range, except for towards the end of the volley. So, what am I going to do this evening that's going to open your mind? What I'm going to do is I'm going to take these 3 videos and align them. I'm going to align them to one common visual event. For those, and I'm not going to go into how I did it or anything, because I've already covered that in a previous video, and I'll make reference to that video towards the end of this one. So if I pull up my sonic visualizer layers here, where I mark that common visual event, it was, I used the Mandalay Bay marquee, and I watched it, and I synchronized the videos according to certain event on that. So what we're going to do is align those videos all to that visual event. And let's watch what happens to the audio stream. So let's do a rough alignment here with them towards the middle line. Okay, and then let's do a detailed by expanding it out and moving that common event, namely in this case it was going from dark to light at the end of a little region, on this marquee sign. Alright, there we go. So now we've aligned all three videos. You don't need to know where they are at the moment, because that's irrelevant to this discussion, because this same technique can be applied to any and all videos, and you'll come up with similar results. So we align them visually. So now they're all synchronized, and if there was no, drift or anything in the videos, if they all had the same sampling rate, then the frames should, I say should, line up pretty good, and you would see the same events happening at the same time if those videos witnessed them. But what happened to the audio? Alright, well let's get down here, and you say, whoa, now the audio has shifted itself to regions where it does not line up. But what we can tell from this is which video was closest to the source of the sounds, and that's assuming all these sounds were produced by one source, which I believe they were. So if we expand this out a little bit without moving things off the left, we can see that, and we'll use this little red line, that up on the top, up here, the first muzzle blast occurred where the red line is, and for the pane in the middle, the first muzzle blast is some distance to the right, meaning it was recorded at a later time. Remember, by aligning all these visual events, we've now synchronized the time. Now, we don't know what the absolute value of the time, whether it was 10:05 and 1/10 of a second, or 10:05 and 2/10 of a second, or in this case 10:12 and 34, or 10:12 and 33, because we have no reference point that starts at an absolute time, and all these times become relative. But whatever the real absolute time is, you would simply apply it to the offsets in the videos recorded by this sign change, and you'd have all the visual events lined up to an absolute time. So this is on the first pane where the first muzzle blast was recorded. Second one, you'll notice that the first muzzle blast was recorded sometime later, and on the third one you'll notice then that the first muzzle blast, which is I guess we need to do some coloring now. The first muzzle blast is, whoops, no, I misaligned it, oh well, is, oh, it's still, why isn't it letting me draw? I don't know. Highlighter, pen. Well, I'm going to have to restart that little puppy before I can. Doesn't seem to want to do that, so I got to restart it. But anyway, while we're talking, let's go back and, or while we're waiting, go back and realign these signs. Oh, there we go. Let's see if we can get some ink this time. Yeah, now we've got ink. All right. So we still have it pretty well aligned here, don't we? I may have shifted it, so let's go back and realign it. Realign it visually. Yeah, I shifted it a little bit. Alright, there we go. Now I can go back and alright, square, there we go. So we're back to, you notice that the first muzzle blast for this one occurred right there. Alright, so what we have now is a situation where by aligning the three videos to a common visual event, we can tell which sound in global absolute time was recorded first. And the answer is this one, because it appears to on the leftmost or the earliest time. So this video was recorded first, or the sound was recorded first, second, and third. So the value of aligning a video with an absolute thing is to allow you to determine, one, when the sounds were heard in a time that is as it was recorded that evening, because everybody's experience is the same time, and 2, what the gap is or what the offset is. But the real big eye-opener is not that, because I think most people understand that the sound produced by the gunshot, in this case we'll restrict our dealings to the muzzle blast only, have a delay between when the gun was fired and when you hear them, and that delay is proportional to the distance away from the gun and the speed of sound. So the further away you are, the longer it takes that sound to get to your recording device. The further away you are, the later in time you record the same sound that a closer person would record at an earlier time. And that's what this graph, this technique is showing you. That the video down here on the third one recorded the sound in real time first, the video up here second, and the video third. Okay, all fine and dandy, right? Right. But you're going to notice a few things here, and let's get this first, second, and third out of our sight. And what you're going to notice now is that if we take all these sounds, well, if we take the 3 videos which we've aligned and run them through a video editor with sound, it's going to combine all 3 audio streams into one. And the resulting audio is going to bear no resemblance to any of these, because it's going to merge them all. And since the audio has been shifted, that the sounds that you hear are not even the same sound, same rounds, right? Because with this second one up here, we hear 7 supersonic cracks and 7 muzzles, and then a small gap. If we were just to listen to the 2 up there, and then we'd hear 6 muzzles, but the other one up there, then you'll hear another supersonic crack and a muzzle, and then another muzzle. So here we have the 8th round over here overlapping with the 6th round down here, and it's even worse for this one, because by the time because it's shifted more left, and you can expand that all the way out. So for example, with one audio you can hear the 3 distinct bursts. This one, will go in snap, crack, snap, crack, snap, crack, and they're real close, it all sounds like one sound. And then there's a distinct gap with, some echoing in there. And then the second burst starts up, all very loud and prominent. And then there's some echoing and there's this gap. But when you overlay the first one and the second one after aligning them, there's no gaps whatsoever, because the gaps from the first one are filled with gunshot sounds from the second one. And similarly, down here, the gaps on this one, which we'll talk about in a minute, are filled with the sounds from both the first and the second one. So it's an entire scrambling of the audio. That's right. If you align videos visually, the likely outcome of the audio is scrambling. And you can make no sense by listening to it whatsoever. So ask yourself this question: how many channels are aligning videos, then either asking you to listen or making statements where they've made some fantastic discovery because in one video they hear a sound which is not present in the other? Well, Jiminy Cricket, if I were to compare these 2 videos here, I would say that I've discovered in this gap up here where we don't hear any sounds from one video, at least 8 more rounds that were never discovered before. When in fact, the reality is that that's just an artifact of aligning the videos visually. What we really have here is 3 videos, all with the same volley. Let me shrink them down a bit here. All with the same. Well, I can't say same, but similar sounds. And if we were to align the audio they would, and you were to merge them together, it would still be a cacophony of sounds, but it would be closer. And you notice now that if we were to align the audios, that the signs, the visual events now would become out of order. And you could not watch those 3 videos and make heads nor tails of them, because the visual events now are not in sync. So nowhere in time, except under very tightly coupled videos, either in the same locations, or some really rare cases where the audio delays are the same but not the same location, can you come up with any statements after you align them visually about the audio. And similarly, it's pretty tough after you align the audio to come up with any statement about the visual events that's realistic, unless you account for the physics of gunshot acoustics. And I have never seen anybody anywhere on any channel explain it like this. I've never seen anybody account for any of the physics when they're making their wild assertions, but I've seen nearly every channel come along and say, well, I've lined up these videos, and now I have discovered new sounds because there's sounds that shouldn't be in this gap. Okay? And in particular, what they typically do is grab a weak audio where the sound is not very distinct and clear, and try to compare that to one where it is clear. And that's like comparing apples and oranges. But underlying the basic problem is that they don't know what they're talking about. They don't use this tool. They don't use any tool even remotely resembling this. They can't tell you which of these from their ears are cracks, supersonic cracks and muzzle blasts, unless they're separated by a pretty decent amount of time. Oh yeah, when the cracks stop and we can hear the muzzle going on, which occurs quite frequently when the lag is large, then you can tell. But while they're happening, let's take the third one down here, for example, because it's the best. When you hear sounds right here at the tail end of any volley, really, any burst, excuse me, you got 2 sounds right here. What are you hearing? You're hearing a muzzle blast at this location, and you're hearing a supersonic crack there. But they are unrelated, because this supersonic crack actually belongs to that muzzle blast way over there. And similarly for each one of these. So the fact that you hear them both at the same time, that does not imply any cause and effect, and it muddies it. And this is strictly based on the fact that the physics of the supersonic crack are complicated, and it does not preserve the time displacement as do the muzzle blasts. So in this case, everything's delayed. And that gives people great consternation. And the spacing between, another way of stating it is that the spacing between the supersonic cracks does not track the spacing between the muzzle blasts. It may get close at times because either there's small lag or there's no change in the bullet path. But usually that's not the case. Usually the bullet path is changing pretty substantially, and as it does, it changes the timing of the supersonic cracks. Whereas the muzzle blasts don't have to deal with that. They deal strictly with distance and speed of sound. So, where does that bring us to? The other greatest common error in comparing these videos when they're aligned, even if the audio came up close, is people ignoring lag. For example, let's take and this is a good one. Let's take and compare these first 2, and I'm going to make them a little bit bigger so that we have more of a view here. These are 2 videos, right? And if we were to align the signs, thereby shifting the audio way off. And let's do a pretty good job of lining the signs so that we're not fudging things. There we go. So if we were to merge these two audios, then what we would hear in the first audio is a very prominent crack and muzzle blast at the same time. And sometimes, they overlap, but in this case, the supersonic crack almost always splits the time between muzzle blast, and we know this is about the time between muzzle blast is about 0.1 seconds, and therefore the supersonic cracks come in between at 0.050 seconds roughly after the muzzle blast or before, whichever way you look on it, because these muzzle blasts, these cracks go, this crack, well, since there is small lag, the cracks in the muzzle blast form a very strict pattern where you have the supersonic crack followed by its muzzle blast without any intervening or overlapping sounds. So in the top case here, this supersonic crack belongs to and is associated with that muzzle blast, i.e. they are both created by one round of ammunition being fired. The top is produced by the supersonic projectile, and the bottom is produced by the exploding gases coming out of the gun. Okay, so in this case, we come along here, and because they are so close like that, you have this gap. Now remember, I lined these with the sign. But then you want to compare that to the video down here. And we see that there are supersonic cracks there, and there are muzzle blasts in this what would otherwise be a blank region. Now these are all the same rounds, these are all the sounds produced by the same rounds, but because you've shifted it, by aligning the video parts, you've created a problem where you can make no statement about the corresponding sounds. Let's take the other one though, that's a little bit better. Well, let's do this. Let's fudge it and say that the process of aligning it, and we can achieve this. Let's line up the muzzle blast. Let's say that theoretically you ended up with, and this is a remote possibility, but let's say you ended up with a scenario where you aligned the audio of these two things. And we can align the audio by aligning the muzzle blasts. If you try aligning the supersonic cracks, it will never align. You might get within you could get close, but not exact. So there we go, a rough aligning, and now all the other muzzle blasts should be aligned. So if we pull up over here a muzzle blast on the center portion and align the onset of them. Alright, then we've aligned all of the muzzle. You can see all of the muzzle blasts now line up. Bum, bum, bum. So in this case, we've aligned the muzzle blasts. But what happens when, of course, the visual now is way off. So you can never have a person who lines up both the visuals and the audios at the same time. And if anybody ever proclaims that, they are both lying and fraudulent. So in this case, where we have lined up the audios based upon the muzzle blasts, what we have, and then we proceed to render this in our favorite video or audio program, what we might hear is in this gap region from the first audio, the supersonic cracks from the second video. Now because this second video doesn't have consistent supersonic cracks, you end up with two prominent cracks occurring in a otherwise kind of quiet region, and so when they're merged together, all of a sudden you hear these standalone supersonic cracks. Those aren't new shots. Those cracks are the supersonic cracks produced by, oops, well that's kind of too big. here and there. Those go together. And the distance between them is called the lag. And that's a function of the physics of the generation of the supersonic cracks. And this is the second big takeaway. And this is the second most common mistake. These supersonic cracks don't have to follow any precise pattern because the bullet path changes, the intensity and the timing changes. Now in good audio, or in good samples, I like to work with good samples. I try to pick audios which have, pretty consistent supersonic cracks and muzzle blasts for the entire volley. But this is one where there was something unique about it that I did look at. So, I've identified in one video why nearly every channel, 99.9% of the time, is demonstrating, one, their ignorance, and two, potentially the fraudulent attitude they take, and three, their complete and utter lack of understanding of any of the physics and the math regarding gunshot acoustics. Now, let John Collins say who's the new sheriff in town, because I'm going to be on top of these folks every time they start making these ridiculous statements. And believe me, they occur on a very regular basis. So, that's my attitude after coming home from a hospital, where life really does matter and time is precious, and we shouldn't be wasting it on bullshit. So, Vegas, October 1 sounds out for the evening, and I hope you enjoyed this little video.